So you should all be looking at the Lexington Parkway Passive House. And oh, as Doug said, it's the first Passivhaus certified house in the city of St. Paul, and only the second single family residence in in the United States to get Passivhaus Plus certification. I'll go into more detail on what that is. My wife and I have been living here for a little over a year, and we really like the house. So I want to give you the background on what the project goals were and how we met them and how things are working out for that. So our number one goal was reduced energy consumption, sustainable operation. If possible, we wanted to go to a net zero CO2 operating cost. And beyond that, we wanted to plan for aging in place because we're not getting any younger. So this is kind of our retirement investment for our golden years. And we also, in construction, when we were choosing materials, wanted to choose the lower impact, lower carbon footprint material whenever something was suitable. We wanted ample natural light in all the living spaces. Basically, we have windows in every room except the closets. We wanted low maintenance design and materials, both inside the house and exterior materials, and the whole landscape, actually. In the landscape, we were intent on demonstrating best management practices for runoff retention and reduced energy and material cost for maintaining the landscape. I do not like mowing lawns, and unfortunately, as new construction, a lawn is the easiest thing to slap down, and that's what we did. But we're working now on making that change. I'll talk about that in more detail also. The biggest part of that is environmentally friendly landscaping, especially habitat for pollinators. It's a big jolt to move from our home of 27 years in White Bear Lake, where we invested 27 years in building up gardens that were attractive to birds and pollinators, and then to come here. In the Como neighborhood, there's a good base of wildlife, but this particular lot was conventional landscaping, and it's going to take a while to overcome the inertia of that and rebuild, I'll call it a pollinator paradise. We also wanted to be an example for others. So with my background as an interpretive naturalist and Diane's background as an activist, we both wanted to do tours inside and outside, show off the project, tell people why we did things the way we did, in hopes of inspiring people to do similar projects on their own. So many of you, I think, know what a passive house is. It's a voluntary certification program. I guess you could compare it to the LEED certification program, although it very tightly addresses energy use for day-to-day living and tries to minimize that as much as possible. So that's its primary focus. Especially space heating and cooling. There are actually two institutions that do certification. One of them is the Passivhaus Institute US, and one is just the Passivhaus Institute, which is in Europe. That's the original, and that's the certification that we went for and got. Our designer, the design firm was TE Studio. Principal designers Tim Ian and Stefan Tanner, and our interior design consultant and accessibility consultant was Slachter Design Studio. We got the idea for doing this from my own interest from my college years in earth-sheltered, solar-heated homes. That was a big thing in the 70s when I was at the University of Minnesota. And in fact, in 1992, I started building a house in Wisconsin that was sort of a hobbyist's attempt to build an earth-sheltered passive solar home. Very low budget. I think the materials cost and contractor cost was around $30,000, and then a lot of sweat equity, but ended up with a house that I was very happy with, and then got married and moved to the Twin Cities. So that house has passed on to another owner, but it was a stepping stone. The real eye-opener for me in figuring out what kind of a house would I really like to live in was visiting the Concordia language camps and seeing the Waldsee Biohaus Environmental Living Center. The principal designer for that building, Stefan Tanner, is the partner of Tim Ian, the principal designer for our house. So that was a connection that I didn't even know about until we went to a green expo at the state fairgrounds back, I don't remember, early 2000s, I think. No, it would be somewhere around 2008, 2009, 2011, I'm not sure. And we ran across Tim Ian, who's a certified passive house designer, and we talked with him because I was really gung-ho about passive house design criteria. And it turned out to be a good fit. So we ended up working with him and Stefan. The design criteria for passive house relies on 5 strategies. One of them is good thermal insulation. One is high performance windows. One is heat recovery ventilation system. One is very solid air tightness. And one is reducing the number of thermal bridges between the indoor environment and the outdoor environment. So for our specific situation, our exterior walls are 18 inches thick. They're insulated with basically recycled newspaper, dense packed cellulose. I think we have 20 some inches in the ceiling cavity under the roof. So we're well insulated. And then for air tightness, you do a blower door test to see how much air infiltration occurs at a certain pressure differential. And we beat the minimum requirement for standard construction by 6 times. We're 1/6 as much infiltration as a code-built home. And we're well within the requirements for a passive house for that air tightness. Thermal bridge reduction for us started with the entire foundation is clad in insulating foam, both inside and outside of the frost footings, underneath the floor slab. We have a slab on grade. We don't have a basement. So there's no ground contact. No part of the house structure itself is in direct contact with the soil. It's all mitigated by insulation. And even for locations where a sidewalk comes up to the house and there's a doorway into the house, so there's a cement slab that leads right up into the wall of the house, there's an inset piece of insulation to prevent a thermal bridge between that sidewalk and the foundation of the house. So we're like wrapped in a cocoon of insulation. Passivhaus windows, what we've been told and keep hearing is that there aren't any firms in the US that make a window that has an energy performance that's sufficient to meet Passivhaus standards. And so we ordered our windows from Germany, and it was quite an adventure getting them here because there were any number of delays, and I won't go into that, but if you want to ask during questions, we can get into that. At any rate, they're triple pane, low emissivity, inert gas filled, and they have multiple weather stripping, and they have insulation incorporated into the frame in order to improve thermal performance. And they perform for a window amazingly well. roughly R11 in terms of the R value. Heat recovery ventilation, we have a Zender Comfo Air Q330, I think. And that spaghetti tangle of white pipes above the manifold in the top right of that photo, those are the air ducts that conduct fresh air to the living spaces in the house, and they pull waste air out of the workspaces in the house, like the kitchen, the workroom, the bathrooms, the laundry. And the end result is the indoor environment stays pretty much tempered, same humidity, same temperature that we want, but we're getting fresh air in all the time. And the rate of exchange is pretty high. I think the air quality in this house is probably a lot better than what we had in our kind of standard construction 1950s Rambler in White Bear Lake, where I think if you added up all of the gaps around windows and cracks between the foundation and the house proper, you'd end up with a fairly large hole connecting the indoors and the outdoors if you put all of that together. Here we're much tighter sealed, but because of this air exchanger, we're getting the equivalent of every 3 hours opening all the windows and doors in the house for half an hour. And so there's that much air exchange on a regular basis. This system runs all the time, and the air quality is excellent. Then a passive house, to get certified, has to be all electric, no fireplaces, no gas stove, no gas furnace, no combustion, basically. So you're not bringing in combustion air and you're not exhausting exhaust gases. So that helps with the air tightness, but it means that you use electric heating. So we have an air-to-air heat pump. We did not go for in-ground for geothermal because that's a big investment and it doesn't pay off. Well, it wouldn't pay off over our remaining lifetime. If we were starting out in our 20s, I think it would be very much worth considering. Being an all-electric house, we have the opportunity to basically get all of our energy needs met with solar photovoltaic panels. And so our designer, part of the package for passive house design is a very thorough engineering package, which estimates heating and cooling loads and all other electrical costs. And from that, our designer was able to come up with that we needed a 9.3 kilowatt solar array on the roof of the house. And so that's what we put in. The provider for that was Impact Power Solutions here in the Twin Cities. And our first year of living in the house, we discovered that we came really, really close to meeting net zero. Anything that's below the 0 kilowatt hour line on this chart, that's energy that we're selling into the grid during the sunny months of the year. And then for 5 months, we had energy needs that we had to buy energy from the grid. We weren't producing as much in those shorter days during the fall and winter. But it came very close to break even. I calculate that we replaced 95% of the energy that we used. So we're almost at 100%. We're almost net zero. And we'll be seeing what we might be able to do by way of fine tuning. Since the array went live in December of 2019, we've produced 15 and a fraction megawatt hours, which adds up to a lot of CO2 emissions not put into the air and equivalent tree planting and so on. And we did receive our Passivhaus certification, and the plaque is the same if you get the Passivhaus Plus certification. The reason, the difference between plain Passivhaus and Passivhaus Plus is that plain Passivhaus has high efficiency and low heating and cooling needs and electrical usage. Passivhaus Plus adds to that you include renewable energy at a rate that offsets your use so that you come to net zero or very close to it. And so, as I said, we're the second Passivhaus Plus certified home in North America, I think, definitely in the United States, which is not as big an accomplishment as it might sound like, because that certification was only established a short time ago. And so I expect there will be a lot of people who will be building to that specification as time passes. We just happen to be one of the first to do it after the certification became available. For aging in place and accessible design, all of our entryways are grade level. So easy to get a wheelchair or a walker into and out of the house. The stainless steel railing that you can see in the lower right corner of that photograph runs all the way along from the driveway to the front entry. And that provides extra stability for somebody who has mobility impairment. It also has a tape light, an LED strip light running down the underside for its entire length, so that the sidewalk, when we have it illuminated, is evenly illuminated. There aren't bright spots and darker spots in between like you'd get with conventional lighting. And that, according to our accessibility consultant, is a real help for safety for people as their eyesight begins to deteriorate with age. We also have a balcony, which is also, of course, a wheelchair accessible balcony. All of our interior hallways are wide enough for a wheelchair, all of our interior doorways, and so on. And then all of our window and door hardware and our cabinet hardware is all ADA compatible, ADA compliant. We selected for large, easy to grasp, easy to operate handles. We have an elevator because we have a 2-story house, and we wanted 2 stories because we wanted daylight in all the rooms, and we didn't want to have big window wells, but also because we like looking out from an elevated perspective. And so the elevator became an essential. Our stairway wraps right around the elevator shaft. Right now we're using the elevator as a closet, although we have used it to move furniture up and down. And we've had a couple of guests who really appreciated not having to tromp up and down the stairs, and I'm sure we'll have more. For reduced environmental impact, the story really starts with the house that was on this lot before. We bought the house and the lot around the end of 2011. And our first task was to see if we could have the house moved so that somebody else could use it on a different lot, because we wanted to build from scratch. It's a much simpler process than trying to do a retrofit to Passivhaus standard. And because the lot is a pie wedge shape with a very narrow street frontage on the access side, and because that street is very narrow also, there was no way that this house could be moved off of this lot even in a couple of pieces. So we ended up having it deconstructed rather than just torn down and tossed into a landfill. We ended up with every bit of material that could be salvaged and repurposed was salvaged and repurposed. So a lot of the lumber went to various people who needed lumber. All of the brick and the concrete from the foundation and the cellar slab was ground up and turned into aggregate to make new concrete. And the appliances went to a family in Minneapolis, and we ended up retaining some of the material to do the finished paneling in our workroom. That's kind of our knockabout room. The paneling has holes in it. It looks very distressed. And so we kind of like that, because it means if we want to put a shelf up, we don't feel like we're injuring brand new wood that should be left sacrosanct. We've got this stuff that has holes in it already, and it doesn't hurt at all to put a screw into that. And we also saved some of the cabinet hardware from the original house and used it in the workroom. For the lumber that we had to purchase, we used either Sustainable Forestry Initiative or Forest Stewardship Council certified lumber. So sustainably harvested in both of those cases. And for the concrete, for the foundation and the floor slab, 50 to 55% of the Portland cement that's in that concrete mix was omitted and replaced instead with fly ash. So we're an end user basically for a waste product, fly ash being a waste product. And that reduced the carbon footprint of making the cement that was needed to make the concrete. For siding, we had a lot of options to choose from. We ended up going with an enamel coated steel. We wanted low maintenance, we wanted long lifetime. The steel gives us that. And if it reaches the end of its operating life, sometime after we're dead, it can be fully recycled, unlike things like vinyl or some other types of siding. And then the wood siding in this photo is ash from trees that have been taken down because of emerald ash borer. It's been heat treated to make it weather resistant. It does not need to be stained or painted unless you want it to continue to retain that wood color. It will gradually go to sort of a barn board gray over the wear and tear of rain and sun and so on. And we're perfectly happy with that. We like the idea of a house where you don't have to do anything to the siding except maybe hose it down every now and then. And for interior finishes, for flooring, a large part of the house is done with cork floor, so a renewable resource that's sustainably harvested. We have the master suite carpeted with wool carpeting, so renewable resource there as well. And that carpet backing, instead of being a synthetic, is jute fiber, so that also is sustainable. For the kitchen and workroom, we have a linoleum that, again, linoleum is made from renewable resources. And then we have quarry tile for entryway areas and bathrooms. That's probably the most embodied carbon of all of our flooring materials, because tile is fairly heavy. And so the fuel cost to transport it means that there's a larger carbon footprint than there might otherwise be. We opted to insulate the garage in addition to insulating the house. The garage is a much simpler construction. It's only, I think, a 2x8 wall with the dense packed cellulose. It ends up that it's actually insulated to the standard that's required as a residential standard in the city of St. Paul. So it's actually as good as homes that are being built now. We wanted it insulated because we wanted the flexibility over time, or the next owner's flexibility, to be able to heat and cool the garage if they wanted to, or if we want to. So we have some resilience in our design. For natural light, we have a huge swath of windows facing south, but also windows all the way around. The north side has very few windows because there's not much to see in that direction, and it's also not an energy gain, but we can gain solar energy through the south windows during the winter, and also in the mid-season, the shoulder seasons, we can gain some from east and west. This also gives us a fabulous view. We're right across from Como Golf Course. We didn't buy the lot because of the view. We bought the lot because it was within our price range. We could not find a vacant lot in Ramsey County that we wanted to build on. They were either very steep or they were next to high-rise apartment buildings, and that didn't seem to be the kind of place we wanted to build. So we started looking at homes that we could deconstruct for a reasonable amount of cost. And we ended up with this lot, which has a fabulous view. And I will tell you truthfully, I didn't really notice the view until well after we had determined that the lot would be suitable for passive solar construction. It was kind of like, oh, and there's a view also. Those big windows, floor to ceiling, on a corner of the house are a real potential hazard for bird collisions. And because we're trying to model good wildlife habitat, good yard maintenance for wildlife as well as humans, we went with glass in those windows specifically that has an ultraviolet imprinted pattern on the outside of the pane. It's not visible unless you're at exactly the right angle looking at it from the outside. It's not visible to humans, but to birds, it's very bright. They see ultraviolet. And so that crisscross pattern that looks kind of like a spider web has proven effective in a lot of tests at keeping birds from flying into the glass. We've had essentially, well, so few window collisions in our first year here that I can't even remember the last time that we had one. So that's performing satisfactorily. And on the windows that don't have this, if we did start having window collisions, we could retrofit with a film that we could apply to the outside. But so far we haven't seen a need to do that. Also, for heat control during the warm season, there are remotely operated metal Venetian blinds that roll down outside the windows. So if we want to completely deflect any solar light or solar heat from getting into the house, it gets deflected outside of the thermal envelope of the house instead of being deflected by blinds inside the house and therefore heating up the house more. And these are easy to operate, and just like Venetian blinds, you can stop them at any height and you can rotate the vanes so that they're louvered so that you can see out and still protect against direct sunlight coming in. And they've performed very well for us. For runoff management, we planned on having rain gardens that would accept the water from all of the rooftops and all of the paved surfaces, and essentially on the upper part of the lot, everything over to the retaining wall that curves right here. Everything in this part of the lot stays on the lot in an average rainfall. What we're concerned about is the part of the lot that slopes down toward Lexington Parkway. We haven't had an opportunity yet to see how much runoff comes off of that lawn and goes into the storm sewers that run along Lexington Parkway. But we have some ideas in mind for berms that would slow down the rate of water running off of that so that we can essentially model the best practice, which is keep all runoff on your own lot if you can. Get it to percolate into the ground where it'll do some good instead of running into a lake or a river where it will convey pollutants and nutrients that are not wanted there. Those rain gardens last year were at a very beginning stage. New plant plugs, I put in, I don't know how many 100 plants last year, and they all made it, and they started blooming, but they were, not what we were used to with a yard that had 27 years worth of plants getting older and getting more vibrant. So we still have that to look forward to. Things are looking better this year, and I'm adding more plants. And we did see success in the form of pollinators showing up on those plants in the rain gardens. A native common eastern bumblebee and a green sweat bee. And in the riprap that we put at the end of the rain gardens to mitigate any overflow, we also found that a chipmunk thought that that was just a dandy place to hang out. So we're already moving towards our goal of having a wildlife-friendly installation. I mentioned we've got mowed lawn right down to Lexington Parkway. That's a big expanse of grass. I don't like mowing. I don't like the runoff coefficient. Mowed lawn tends to shed water almost as efficiently as concrete does under some conditions. And we have clay soil, so we have the conditions where the water tends to sheet off instead of soak in. So we will be looking at putting in a lot more gardens, putting in a lot more trees and shrubs. This is a draft plan for converting more and more of the yard to garden space during the next few years. Still thinking about berms or just soil improvements to try to get the soil to perk better so that the water will stay on the lot and percolate into the soil. We want to be a good example. We want to be essentially a teacher. And so we do sign our yard as pollinator habitat. And we do belong to the conservation organization Wild Ones, which is talking about doing conservation 1 yard at a time. And we're really hoping that we can start to have an effect on other folks who see this. And the happy news is that our neighbor right across the street, so where I'm standing to take this photo, the neighbor that's right behind me, they just eliminated all of the sod on their boulevard, and they've planted it with native plants that are attractive to pollinators. So it's catching on. We have another neighbor a couple of houses down that has started putting in native plants as well. And we've had other people say, oh, I think I might want to do that. Could you give us some ideas? And I'm always happy to give ideas. During construction, we had 3 tours. One of them at least was videotaped, and there's a link to it that I will put up on the screen here and talk about. The irony of wanting to be an example for others and a teaching tool, having the house as an example, is that we moved in the first month of the COVID lockdown. And so we have not had a tour since we moved in. We're hoping that things are brightening up now and that we'll have a greater opportunity for tours coming up. No plans in place right now, except in one way or another, we want to participate in the October solar tour. And I got through that a little faster than I sometimes do, so that gives us a little more time for questions. But take a look at these links, the YouTube link. Don't try to copy that down, just browse to YouTube and do a search on Lexington Parkway Passive House. And you will find my channel, which has a construction overview slideshow from beginning to end, and a series of time-lapse videos that show different parts of the process, from excavation through framing through solar panel installation. The designer's website, if you go to TE Studio and search on Lexington Parkway Passive House, you'll find the designer's perspective on the project. And from that site, there are links to that one of those construction tours. So with that, I am going to, I guess, I will turn off screen sharing and open it for questions.
Well, Dave, that's a great presentation, and I hope to see your house on the solar tour this fall. Do you have a way to paste the links into the chat here for the presentation?
Sure. Let me fiddle around with that a little bit.
Dave, I assume you're also driving electric vehicles?
We aren't yet. We own 2 Priuses, and they are not the plug-in type. We were early adopters of the Prius. And when they wear out, it's our intent to replace them with electric vehicles.
Yeah, it's just a beautiful facility. Do you know, one question that people have asked, I've been around some other passive homes, is that, you know, what percentage above normal price to build would you say you're at, or how did that work out for you?
What we have seen kind of industry-wide is that a passive house costs about 15 to 20% more than a similar designed house that does not have the added insulation and airtightness and windows. It's hard in our case to make a comparison on our project because so much of the house was custom designed. The full height windows and the balcony and so on. There were a lot of components that make it hard to compare with any other house in the neighborhood. But 15 to 20% above the same house, if you built it conventionally, that's a pretty good yardstick.
Okay.
Have you calculated the payback, or how many years until you kind of hit the point where it's equal to a conventional house?
Well, no, we didn't look into that. It would be fairly easy to do that with the photovoltaic installation because we know the set price for what that cost us. And we can look at our energy savings per year and come up with a number. Yeah, it's something that I'd love to be able to do, but I don't think I can collect the required information to see at what point that 15 to 20% gets paid back. We just have the warm fuzzy feeling, that says, oh, we did good.
Well, that's the most important thing, really. If you feel like your money's well spent living there, then every day of your life benefits from investment you've made, and there's really no way to to calculate that against other options.
Yeah, the good feeling is priceless. And I have to say two things that our designer pointed out. He mentioned during one of the construction tours that many people will build homes with big windows because they love the view. And then because the windows don't perform all that well in Minnesota winters, they end up not sitting anywhere near the window because it's so cold during the wintertime. And I did take some temperature readings on the inside of the glass during the polar vortex when it was 20 to 30 below outside. The inside of the windows was a little bit above 60 degrees at that time. So I thought that was very good. I'm really happy with that. By comparison, we had some spots in our home in White Bear Lake that would hit somewhere in the high 30s when we had really cold weather outside. So just limited locations, but it basically makes your house smaller because there's parts of the house you don't want to be in because they're uncomfortable.
Well, and also I know, Dave, you guys had the privacy issue too. I think Diane didn't really love all the exposure all the time. How did you deal with that? I mean, you're as a couple, you don't always get your own way. What were the compromises or the discussions you had to help, satisfy everybody's needs?
We went through a lot of that in the design process, being aware that, yes, if we have window walls, we're going to be in plain view of people outside. The big mitigation on that was those Venetian blinds, that when we roll those down, we've cut off sight lines completely. We also, right at the end of the process, even while construction was underway, we decided we were going to go ahead and get basically privacy roll down shades on the inside. They emit light, but they're translucent, so you can't see what's going on in the room. And for daytime, that's fine. We did test them at night, and Diane said, oh, I can see every piece of furniture in the house. Well, she could see a shadow of every piece of furniture in the house, but that was enough that when we want privacy, we roll down those blinds, those Venetian blinds. I've got a question from Pete about the blower door test. And yeah, when that photo was taken, the wall interiors were not installed, but actually the vapor barrier was in place. That sheathed wall that the door was set into, the sheathing itself is part of the vapor barrier system. It's got an impermeable membrane across the outside, and each panel of that is taped with an impermeable tape to the panel next to it. It requires a special kind of tape. It requires a special tool to apply it. I cannot remember the name of the system, But basically the vapor barrier was, for that photo, that was the first of 3 blower door tests. So one of them was simply, is the vapor barrier doing what it's supposed to do? And then because it was still exposed on both sides, it was possible to fix any problems. And then after the interior insulation was added, we had another blower door test. And then when the whole project was finished, all the interior finishes and so on, we had the 3rd blower door test. And Chris, you're asking about a garbage disposal. We don't have one. It's an extra power draw. And I gotta admit, my great uncle, my mother's uncle, was a plumber, and he had nothing good to say about disposals. He said houses with disposals are houses where you have to call a plumber a lot because you end up with gunk in your outlet lines. So we just avoided that, and we use the St. Paul organic waste recycling sites.
Great.
Okay, question about the balcony. It's a great place to just go out and sit and look out over the landscape. We're at the height of the birds in the trees around the house. If there had been a state fair last year, it would have been a nice place to listen to the musical performances from the state fair, because the fairgrounds is about a mile away, and I'm sure we could hear it just fine. Potentially a good place to watch fireworks. But one of the things that we projected doing and that we're starting to do is we're putting more and more container grown plants out there. By more and more, at this point, I think we have 4 pots out there, and 2 of them are cactus. So we don't even have to think about watering those. And the other 2, there's a sumac and there's a cherry tomato plant, and those we do have to keep watered. Potentially we would do something like that. We could do it on the garage roof. The garage roof is flat, just like the house roof. And the garage roof doesn't have solar panels on it, although if we wanted to increase capacity, we could add panels there. But the other option is the garage was built with enough of structural support for the roof to accommodate a green roof. So the dead weight of all that growth medium and all the plants is accounted for in the construction of the frame. So that's a possibility for the future. We're not actively investigating that right now, but I do like the idea that buildings take up room, and yet you could still grow stuff in that same footprint that the building is in. And especially some of the plants like the cactus. There's a Minnesota native cactus called brittle cactus that is winter hardy all the way up to the Canadian border. And that's what we've got in pots that sit outside, and we just leave them out there for the winter. And I'm starting to propagate more of it.
Great. Any bull snakes?
Not in this neighborhood, no.
There's a bull snake expert.
Yeah, that's a large part of the volunteering that I've been doing for state parks has been research on bull snakes, because that's a species of special concern in Minnesota. And I find them charismatic, so I like to, get to know them. And I can actually identify individuals by their head markings. So it's like, these are my acquaintances. I know that one, and I know that one. That one mated with that one last year, but this year he's mating with that one. So it's like, the whole family history and everything. For bird anti-collision film, I haven't looked up a source for that. I think your search online would be as good as mine for finding out what that might be. The windows that we put in are made by a company called Ornilux, O-R-N-I-L-U-X. And the pattern is called Mikado, M-I-K-A-D-O. If you look that up, you'll see reviews from projects that have used it and comparisons of how the number of window collisions compares from an installation with that glass versus an installation with conventional glass. But the window film, when it's retrofitted, that gets put on the outside. because that's the side that the bird is going to see most readily. And that's the important component of making a window safe, is that the bird, the first thing it sees should not be a reflection of all the greenery behind it. The first thing it should see is something that says, don't go here.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you're gonna start interpreting, have regular interpreting sessions at your house, like you did at the park, Dave.
Yes. Actually, I should say we did have one outdoor tour after COVID restrictions relaxed. I did have a small group out here to look at the rain gardens. And I expect to do that a lot more in addition to doing tours inside the house.
Dave joined me on a Wild Ones tour of my landscape, and he was the pollinator expert, and had a slideshow going of all of his amazing photographs of pollinators.
So, yeah, I could show one example, which would be real easy, which is, this is actually from Wild River State Park. This is a giant swallowtail butterfly. It's a species that typically is more southern than the Twin Cities. So the southern edge of Minnesota is pretty much the limit of their range. But starting in 2011, giant swallowtails were observed a lot further north, and they've been continuing to be seen all the way up into Chisago and Pine County now for every year since 2011. They're the biggest butterfly species by wingspan of any in the United States.
Wow, it's beautiful.
How much, what size of wingspan do they have?
I'm going to say 4.5 to 5 inches.
Oh my gosh.
Which is probably an exaggeration. They sure look big. They might literally only be more like 3.5 inches, but they have a big impact when you see one.
Sure, yeah. Oh, that's great.
Hey, Dave, do you have you done any permaculture kind of design, like on that grade that you've got there, or thought about that kind of thing?
I've kind of got the beginning of that. I really like the idea of permaculture. I like the idea that you install plants that you don't have to maintain, and that start to build community with the soil, and that community continues instead of being disrupted by tilling every year. And then the potential for food for humans from those. I put in a Juneberry, which is some really tasty fruit for humans if the birds don't get it first. And I put in a black cherry this year, not as tasty, but those kinds of things, basically trees and shrubs. I'm looking at doing more, but I'd also be looking at some plants that are maybe not for the pollinators, but are specifically for us to eat. Like we have chives and parsley so far.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dave, before we end, I think that, you know, as I was sort of involved or knew about your process over the last few years, like, could you just give people a time frame from when you started seriously thinking and planning to when you actually got it done, and some of the hassles you had in terms of permitting and getting things you wanted to get done? I mean, this isn't just a smooth process.
No. First thing to say is that we were not in a hurry to get it finished. We were more concerned about getting it right and accommodating what I wanted out of the house and what Diane wanted out of the house. So we did engage with TE Studio right after we bought the lot, and we got a preliminary sketch of what Tim thought would be a workable design, and we looked at it and said, nah. And the upshot of that was we decided that we needed to know what we wanted better before we started asking somebody to give us what we wanted. So we spent literally a couple of years looking at homes, going on tours, looking at books from the library and floor plans. And when we had a better vision for what we wanted, we put that together in the form of a document that said, here's what we want. And then we gave that to our designer, and things went much more smoothly after that. We still went slowly. I've got a knack for understanding construction details and iterative planning, where you get a preliminary drawing and you say, here's what I want changed. And then you get another iteration that has those changes. Diane had a harder time with that. So we accommodated her pace on that. And we didn't break ground until 2018. And then, yeah, construction took from 2018 until we moved in April of 2020, July of 2018 to April 2020. Some parts of that were delays because of the big one was the windows. The timing of the order turned out to be a key thing. Germany has pretty much a national holiday month. They take August off, and our windows were in production at the beginning of August, and then they had nothing done on them until the end of August. And then one of the panes of Mikado glass with the bird imprint on it broke in shipment to the plant that was assembling the windows. So the plant had to wait for a replacement to come. And then they had trouble finding they got the whole shebang packed up into a container, the whole custom order. They had a hard time finding a ship to get the container on. So that delayed for a week or so. And then the ship made it fairly promptly across the Atlantic and unloaded on the East Coast. And then the container was transloaded onto a railroad car, which ended up in Chicago during a huge blizzard. And so the rail yards in Chicago were socked in for about a week. And then they got the container to the Twin Cities, got it loaded onto a flatbed truck, and the truck wouldn't start. So we had another one-day delay while that happened. And then finally, the whole window shipment got here. So that was the biggest delay because of all of those coincidences. But the other thing that was frustrating, you can probably guess anytime you do innovative construction, conventional code inspectors are going to look at things and say, I've never seen this before. Or for that matter, your subcontractors are going to look at the drawing and say, I've never seen anybody do it this way. And sometimes they end up doing it the way that they want instead of the way that you want. So we ended up with a passive radon vent system that was installed in an interior wall like it was supposed to be, but then it transitioned through the roof in a place where there was there didn't have to be a hole in the roof at that spot. It was just kind of a waste thing where, okay, so the roofer has to create an extra hole in the membrane and then seal it up with an extra gasket and all that kind of stuff. But back to code inspectors, the electrical inspector for our house was not at all familiar with those exterior blinds that we have. And he wanted a lot of hoops jumped through on that. He just, at first, I think he was saying, I can't sign off on this. And so the team was saying, well, what do you need in order to sign off? And the electrical inspector wanted, okay, it's got to be UL approved. Well, okay, so the company that made the blinds produces the UL certification for the blinds and gives it to the inspector. And the inspector says, well, okay, but when you connect the apparatus that's in the blinds, which is UL approved, to the house wiring, what's the approval on that? And he just got hung up on that until we called a city council person and said, this is why we haven't moved in yet. And she said, I'll work on that for you. And we got that taken care of fairly quickly. But then there were a series of other little glitches, like one of the shades was damaged during installation and a new part had to be shipped. And when it was shipped, it was the wrong part. And then when it was shipped again, The subcontractor had it in his construction trailer, which was parked at another site where he was working, and it was stolen. So he had to reorder the part again. And then he had a deadline on another house that he had to complete. And so it was just one thing after another. We finally got all of the blinds except one in, and we put like a 3-fold screen up in front of that window to block sight lines and moved in. And then he finally, a couple of months later, got the parts that he needed and got it finished.
Well, it's not for the faint of heart, the process.
Yeah, and you know that very well from your own experience.
I do, but it was worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Dave, one thing I wanted to ask you is, you know, a couple of the net zero kind of homes that I've been around, they went through that same thing you're talking about of, you know, not getting contractors that knew how to do what they wanted to do because they'd never done it before. And so I was just wondering, like working with a design group like you did that help, you think, find, or did they have already contractors that were more familiar with doing things in a different way?
It didn't help in that way because the design group doesn't take on the task of saying, here's the contractor you should work with. That was, by the way, another delay because they did actually have a contractor who had built several houses that they had designed, and he was on track to build ours, and then he backed out. So we had to canvass for another contractor to build the home. And so that other contractor had a bunch of subcontractors that they routinely work with who hadn't built one of these before. So there was a certain amount of struggle with that. However, the amount of detail that our designer puts into the drawings to say, this is exactly how things need to be done. And here's the specifications for, in general, if you're doing plumbing, here's how the plumbing has to be done and so on. Because it was all extremely well defined and it was all part of the contract, it went smoother than if it had been, you know, we want something energy efficient and we expect you to build it for us, but we're not going to tell you down to every dot on the I and every cross on the T, exactly how to do that. I think the construction drawings for this project are maybe the most comprehensive that the contractor that built the house has ever seen.
And another thing is that I had trouble with on my house. The builder basically said, we'll do the energy efficiency part. We really get that, but we don't get accessibility. That you're going to have to take care of that, make sure that's done on your own. In other words, making sure that, you know, everything they do. So I ended up being almost like the subcontractor. I did get some help in that regard, but did you find that too, that the contractors, they don't seem to put accessibility, aging in place concepts and the landscape and the building together?
Yeah. We were pretty fortunate because we did have a specific designer for interior design and accessible design. And she conferred with the contractor when necessary. Okay. So that helped a lot. It also meant we paid more design fees. So it's a trade-off. I have a question from Barbara about the blinds being exterior, and they're completely outside of the window rather than in between the panes. And the reason for that is it's a less complex installation and it allows the window to be built as an integrated unit. So the blinds run on tracks that are attached on either side of the window so that they are very secure. And there is actually a wind gauge on the roof that talks to the controllers for the shades. If the wind speed exceeds 40 miles an hour, the shades are not guaranteed to not get bent by the wind lashing them around. And so the shades will automatically retract at 40 miles an hour, which means in the middle of the night, we might find that our bedroom windows are suddenly not covered by shades anymore. So we always keep a bathrobe at each side of the bed.
How does that work with icing up and stuff like that, snow?
Haven't seen any problem with icing. We haven't had a really bad freezing rain event since we've been in the house. if the shade is retracted, it's no problem. If the shade is down, wet snow or freezing rain could make it hard for the shade to retract. And in that case, you might end up waiting a couple of days before the sun comes out and melts it off.
Right.
What about the solar panels? Do you think in the winter you'll be up there cleaning them off, or?
We've cleaned them off a couple of times in the winter, mainly to see how much effect it had and how much work it was and how practical it is. And it's not ideal because we have a flat roof, which has like a one-piece membrane over the entire roof. The racks that the solar panels are mounted on are held down by weights rather than actually being bolted down into the framing of the house, because the bolts would create extra opportunities for water to sneak in. And so because the panels are held down by weights, the panels are inclined at a relatively low angle so that they don't catch much wind. So 45 degrees would be perfect for Minnesota for this latitude, and we're at 10 degrees, which means that the panels accumulate more snow. It doesn't slide off as easily.
Yep.
And also because they're relatively low profile, when the snow slides off of them, it pretty much fills the space around them so that the next batch of snow has nowhere to go.
Yeah.
So we reach a point where it's not worth trying to clean them off any further. And we looked at the generation capacity in the short days of December and January, and realized, okay, first of all, panel at 10 degrees, sun hitting it from about a 30-degree angle, that's not very efficient generation. And then those days are really short. So the amount of generation that's possible on those 10-degree panels on a winter day without snow on the panel is not really that big. What we make up for then is during the height of summer, when the sun is overhead, it's shining onto those panels at a very good angle, and we're generating a lot more power than if the panels were at 45 and the sun was hitting them like that. So it's kind of a trade-off. We've basically decided that allowing snow to be on the panels in the winter some of the time is a sacrifice that's okay with us, because we're just not losing that much generating capacity in those short days. Nevertheless, we'll go up and clean the panels off now and then.
Yeah, we're hearing that more and more from people, that the winter production, and especially with the amount of cloudiness we've had in the last year or so, it's like, forget about it in the winter, just get your production in the summer and balance it out.
Yeah, I'll quick do another screen share here. And then scroll this up. I think, nope, I'm as big as I can get. Maybe. Okay, try and get this under control. All right, so you can see the bell curve. There's really not much production in those short day length months, and then it skyrockets during the longer days.
Yeah.
And so, like I say, the lost energy opportunity is during the months where you're just not losing that much.
So is your solar net metered, or how's that arrangement go with the power company?
It's net metered. So Excel pays us if we make more than we use. They pay us a little bit more per kilowatt hour than they charge for the energy they sell back to us, because it helps them meet their renewable energy goals.
Right. But then in the winter, if you're not getting the generation you need and it's cold for a while, you're not going to be frozen out of the house. I know the insulation is a big part of that, but
yeah, and we're still using electrical heat generation during the winter, and we're paying Excel for that, because we're just not replacing it during those winter months. We create more than enough during the summer, and not enough during the winter.
How many mini split installations do you have in the house?
There's one mini split system. So there's one heat pump that sits outside, but it splits to two inside units. One of them is in the house and feeds through a forced air system through vents in the floor and walls. And one of them is in the garage, and it's just a heating and cooling head that sits above the service entrance.
Okay.
And we keep the garage above freezing with that unit because that's where the inverter for the solar panels is. And we also have an emergency backup battery. We're not trying to store energy during the night or during the day and then use it during the night. The battery doesn't, store up during the day and discharge at night. It just sits there and stays charged. And if we ever did have a major power outage and we weren't generating any electricity because it was night, we'd still be able to run the refrigerator and lights and outlets in the house. So that's kind of
what kind of hot water heater have you got?
it's an electric resistance hot water heater, very large, like 85 gallons, I think. And I guess the benefit of that is it has so much inherent thermal mass that it's well insulated. Once it gets that volume of water up to the correct temperature, it doesn't take much to keep it there.
Right.
Dave, have you considered adding storage, especially now if you move toward EVs or something?
So adding like battery storage?
Yeah, like a Tesla Powerwall or something like that.
Yeah, we could do that. Space would be a consideration because our garage is kind of like containing everything that came from the basement of our old house. So we'd have to move some of it in order to make room for more batteries. Okay. But yeah, the battery that's out there is it's made by LG rather than by Tesla, but it's the equivalent of a Tesla Powerwall.
Okay. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of people, or at least on our solar tours and stuff, that are, if they're running an EV, they're putting in 1, 2, and even one guy we just talked to has 4 Powerwalls, and drives 2 EVs. So the storage is, of course, a major help with a lot of this stuff. So yeah, it's great what you've done. It's amazing. It's really something that we can't wait to have you on the tour and have you share some of this knowledge with you. Hey, I got one other final question. This is always the trick question, but if you had it to do all over again, what would you do different? Anything?
I don't think there would be any big differences. We're irritated by where we ended up putting some of our light switches and outlets. So there's some small details that, if we had that to do over again, we'd do that differently. But as far as working with the designer and the finished design, we like that. We would probably choose to work with a different contractor. We had the project built by Reuter Walton because they had a project manager who had been the project manager on another passive house that was built in Wisconsin, and they wanted to break into the market. Okay. But they ended up selling their residential division right after they finished building the house. So they don't build houses anymore. And that sort of, we still have all of our warranty services, but it's through a subsidiary company. That's a little unsettling. And we kind of got the feeling that Reuter Walton was kind of like a big box store rather than a custom builder. Sure, they build custom, but they build custom and still want to try and push everybody into doing it the big box way to a certain extent. So there were some tensions there.
Any consideration of like solar tube, that kind of thing?
That would be something that our designer would say, oh, no, you don't want to do that because that's a penetration of the roof.
Yeah.
And so he's all about, let's put the windows in the walls where they're protected more from weather and where it's easy to make sure that the siding dovetails with the window casing, and so all of the moisture stays outside the wall where it's supposed to be.
Well, thank you so much. This has been great. We, MRES, will be sending you a small token of appreciation for tonight.
Thank you.
And please, please join us in other talks or other presentations that we're doing. We'd love to have you involved. It's just really, really neat to see when somebody puts their mind to doing something in the way you guys did, that it, can turn out that beautiful.
It sure did. Oh, well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. And I'm sure between you and others, and Chris especially, we'll stay up to date on what MRES is doing, and we'll be planning ahead for the solar tour in October.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Dave.